In today's Daemonettes of Slaanesh miniature painting guide, I'm going to show you how I painted my award-winning Daemonettes, and it's coming right up.
Saved by Slaanesh.
Nick speaking, and welcome to this video. Right, today I'm going to share how I painted my 20 Daemonettes and my 5 Seekers of Slaanesh for my Emperor's Children army, an army which won joint second place for best army at my recent tournament. Now, before I started painting them, I stuck on some magnetic adhesives underneath the base. This would allow me to, of course, have them magnetised not only to my hobby case, but also to my painting station. I'm matching these units into my army's paint scheme, so let's get them painted. So of course, first of all, I primed them black with a black spray paint. And then I went to work with Dawnstone Grey. This is a slightly watered down mix, so I could build up the colours. Because I'm trying to paint to a high standard, I want all of the layers to be thin and do several coats of them. So first I painted the grey all over the Daemonette's skin and also the rocks that they're standing on. I tried to be as neat as I could. Most of the armour of the Daemonette is going to be black, so I didn't want to be too messy. Once that was dry, I went in with another coat of Dawnstone Grey, let that dry, and I went in with a final third coat. Now I have a really solid base colour. I then used Warp Fiend Grey on the Daemonette skin. I didn't touch the rocks, just the skin. I did 3 layers with a thinned down paint, again just building up the layers. Now I know some people paint areas until they're fully complete and then do the next area. Personally, I like to base coat everything and then work from there. So I continued base painting, and this time it was Altdorfgard Blue, and I did this on the gloop of the base. Again, 3 layers, watered down, and just built up the colour. Continuing with the base, I painted Pink Horror on the tentacles. Again, it's going to be a theme here, 3 layers, thinned down paint. I know the in thing is 2 thin coats. Personally though, I find 3 thin coats better. Okay, so now I just tidied up the joins of the pink, blue and grey on the rocks. It's always best to be neat. If you can be neat as you go along, the end result just looks better. Okay, so next I went in with Iron Breaker and I painted anything that I wanted metal on these miniatures. There was going to be no gold, only silver on these miniatures. My Noise Marines, they have gold, but all of the demons of the army only have silver. Okay, so next was to use a wash. I'm using Druchii Violet, and I carefully washed the skin and the silver that I just painted. I then washed the blue gloop with Drakenhof Nightshade. Now when I'm doing these washes, I am being quite careful with them. I'm being very precise. I'm obviously slapping them on at first, but making sure there's not too many pools of the wash, just spreading it out evenly. And of course, don't forget that when a wash starts to dry, you don't want to be touching it when it's at that state, only when you first just put it on. Now to make my rocks that they're standing on more interesting, I also do washes on the rocks, but what I do is I do patches. So I used the Drakenhof Nightshade to do some patches, and then I used Carisburg Crimson on the rocks by the tentacles, and then I filled in all of the patches that were left with Agrax Earthshade. Once the wash was fully dry on the rocks, I went in with Dawnstone Grey and dry brushed the rocks. After that, I dry brushed them with Administratum Grey, and then right at the end I did a gentle dry brush with Pallid Witch Flesh. This gives the rocks some real character. It makes them look mottled and worn and not just boring grey rocks. I then dry brushed the blue areas of the base with Lothan Blue. Now one reason why I left the pink tentacles till the end was because I knew that that dry brushing would go onto the pink. So next up I tidied up the tentacles with Pink Horror And then I washed the tentacles with Carroburg Crimson and I let that fully dry. And then I dry brushed them with Pink Horror, and at the same time I lightly dry brushed the blue as well. I wanted the blue, which is supposed to be Slaanesh gloop, to have that pink tinge to it. Once that was done, I dry brushed the tentacles with Emperor's Children. I then went in with Lothan Blue and I did a little stipple effect around the tentacles where they come out of the gloop. It just gives more detail to the base. Okay, so now on to the skin of these Daemonettes, and yes, I am going to be dry brushing. Now I know I'm painting these to a high standard and dry brushing can be deemed as a basic technique, but good dry brushing can look super good if you do it well. So always practice dry brushing. Don't be scared to dry brush something. The key thing to good dry brushing is to have as little paint as possible on the brush and just build up the colours. So we are going to go over the skin which we washed purple with Warp Fiend Grey. Yes, that's the base coat that was underneath the purple. And we're just going to dry brush everything with this colour. This of course gives the grey a purpley colour, and also all of the recesses will be purple. Now of course I'm being as careful as I can with this dry brushing, trying not to get it on the black armour, but of course that can't be helped and I will have to touch up that afterwards. Now next I went in with Slaanesh Grey. Again, another dry brush, just building up the colour. I'm matching the skin of the Daemonettes of the demon skin which I used on my demon prints, and also the demon parts on my noise marines. Okay, so with all of that dry brushing done, next I had to tidy up all of the mess from the dry brushing on the black armour, and I just did this with a watered down mix of Abaddon Black. So my army has a spot colour of green and I need to introduce green into these miniatures. I'm using Warboss Green, and I decided to paint the Seeker's tongue with this colour and also the musical instruments tongues. There's some green areas I could paint on the banners, and I just introduced it a little bit here and there. Every model doesn't have to have green, I just need to have a bit of a green fill to the units. There's a skull on the banner which I also painted. I painted that with a base coat of Rakath Flesh, then I washed it with Agrax Earthshade. Once that was fully dry, I went in with Ushabti Bone and did a highlight. I then did a 1-to-1 mix of Ushabti Bone and white. I could go one more layer and maybe just add white onto the skull, which I do for my Space Wolves skulls. But for this army, I felt I wanted to stop there. Okay, so back to the green. I highlighted the green with Warpstone Glow. I then did a 1-to-1 mix of Warpstone Glow and Pallid Witch Flesh. And then I glazed the green with Waywatcher Green Glaze. Next, I highlighted all of the silver areas with Ironbreaker. I just did a little edge highlight just to make the silver pop a little and not too purple. And then I was ready for the biggest thing that I have to do for this army. The thing that took me the longest. The thing that contributed to me taking 3.5 months to paint these miniatures. And that was to highlight the black. Now I started with Xerius Purple, and on the bigger sections I did a dry brush. So dry brushing from the outer edge inwards. So this would be on the bigger claws, for example, and also the hair. Then I went into the medium sections with this colour and I did some feathering techniques. That's where you put the paint on quite thinly and spread the paint out so that it goes into the black and then there's no paint left. It gives you a nice little blend. Next, it was the biggest thing that I had to do out of everything, and that was the Xerius Purple highlights on the small sections. And this time I used a 000 brush and I did edge highlighting on anything that was black. This took me a long time. However, when it was done, I had to do the next highlight on all of the black. and that was with Genestealer Purple. Again, on the bigger sections, doing a dry brush. This is not just a random dry brush, just slapping it all over the place. This is a precise dry brush of exactly where I want it to be. Very, very carefully done, very controlled. Once I'd done that, I then dry brushed the smaller sections. Yes, that's right. On the little claws and spikes, I dry brushed rather than edge highlighting it. And the reason for that is, personally, I don't like my miniatures to be unnaturally highlighted, where they sort of pop, I suppose, more than they would normally. Now, maybe if you're painting for a painting competition, then you might want to go that extra stage and make all of your highlights really pop. But personally, for my army, I don't actually like doing it like that. I prefer a more natural highlight. Now, this dry brush of the smaller areas was only on certain things, maybe the tips of the claws and some of the little spikes. The actual armour itself and all of the really detailed sections, I did an edge highlight with Genestealer Purple, not highlighting the whole of the areas that I'd already highlighted, just some of the areas where I think the light is going to hit. Okay, so that's all done and I'm almost finished. It's just the final details now. So next I went in with a black paint and I painted all of the eyes, just a solid black on all of the eyes. The eyes will eventually have a gloss varnish and that will really look cool, very demon-ish. And then after that I painted the pallid witch flesh over the teeth. There's a few teeth on these demonettes, so I painted them. Then I did the rims of the base and I used magnets to raise the miniature off of my little magnetic topper that I'm using to hold them, and I painted the rims of the base with black. And then it was time to do the decal of the Slaanesh symbol on one of the banners. Now, I used my technique which I always use to give me really, really nice looking decals. I will link you up to that video in the description below, so make sure you check it out if you're interested in learning how I did it. It's pretty simple, gloss varnishing the area you want the decal to go onto, using the micro set and micro sole, getting it into position, letting it fully dry, then going over with a matte varnish over the top to seal it all together. I then went outside and I sprayed the miniatures with matte varnish. I made sure I had matte varnish in my hand and not a black paint. And then after that, when it was fully dry, I got the gloss varnish and brushed that onto the eyes and also onto the blue gloop and the tentacles. And here they are all finished. I'm really, really happy how they came out. And when I put these next to my Empress Children models, the army just looks sweet. I'm loving it. I had a lot of fun playing this army at my Dominion War tournament. If you haven't seen the tournament report video yet, then of course it is linked in the description below. I definitely would recommend you have a look at it because it was so much fun. Everyone was just awesome. Of course, my Seekers were painted at the same time. Here is my Seekers. I'm really loving how they're looking too. Really, really liking what I've done, but I'd be interested to get your thoughts. Let me know in the comments box below. In the meantime, here's some videos which I've talked about in this video for you to watch next.